So I have been running a lot of high-level 5e games. I have 3 different 5e games currently going on. A tier 3, almost tier 4 D&D 2014 game, a level 20 D&D 2024 and 2014 and level up advanced 5e in one system that I call the 3x5e game. And I have a 10th level going on 11th level Tales of the Valiant game. So I've been running a lot of high level 5e. And the number one thing that has made running those games significantly easier for me is this idea called Dreadful Blessings. Dreadful Blessings is my renamed version of Doom Points from the Tales of the Valiant system. I've kind of talked about the beautiful mess of 5e before that. There's new 5e systems published by multiple publishers. They all have really good ideas. Many of those ideas have been released under open licenses, which means other games can pick them up. It means we can pick them up and distribute them. Originally, Doom Points were not released under any kind of license, so I just renamed the concept into Dreadful Blessings. But now Doom Points are actually under a Creative Commons license by Kobold Press, so you can call them Doom Points. You can do whatever you want. You could call them Doom Points anyway, but if I'm writing articles about it, I was a little nervous about writing a bunch of stuff about Doom Points when Doom Points themselves weren't released under any kind of open license. But now they are. I digress. So what is that? What is a Doom Point? What is a Doom Point? What's a Dreadful Blessing? For me, the way I have been using it, which isn't exactly the way that it is used in Tales of the Valiant, but the way I've been using it is that rather than using legendary resistance for great big boss monsters, I instead give them a number of Dreadful Blessings. Dreadful Blessings can do what legendary resistance does, but it can also do anything else. And I usually give significantly more Dreadful Blessings than they had legendary resistance. Legendary resistances are often limited to 3. It's not uncommon for me to give 4 and 5. I think I would do 3 at tier 2-ish, 4 at tier 3, and 5 at tier 4. But you can make a determination. You could even give more. You could give 6. You could spread them out across multiple monsters. You could do all kinds of things. And the key for a Dreadful Blessing is that I put them out on the table. I have physical coins or some kind of representation that shows these Dreadful Blessings. And I put them out on the table so all the players can see. And I will state it very clearly. When you look at this boss, you can see that this boss has 5 Dreadful Blessings, right? And the players go, oh, right? Because they all know what that means. So what can you do with Dreadful Blessings? Anything. Typically, for example, you can use them to automatically succeed on a saving throw when you would fail. But you can also do things like, even if you failed on a saving throw previously, you can now break the effect that is on you. You can do things like break away magical effects or anything that's kind of hit you. An example is, what if you're stuck in a force cage? You could use a Dreadful Blessing to rip out of a force cage. You can use a Dreadful Blessing to devour all the hit points from a minion and give it back to a boss. You can use Dreadful Blessings to give yourself advantage on your next volley of attacks. You can use Dreadful Blessings in order to recharge your breath weapon and immediately use it. You can use Dreadful Blessings to give yourself an entire other set of actions. There's lots of things that you can do with Dreadful Blessings. So really, you can use them for just about anything you want. But with great power comes great responsibility. While you can use them for anything you want, there's lots of things you shouldn't necessarily use them for. And that's what I want to talk about today. Now, the conversation that I'm having right now is because I have used them dozens and dozens of times now with multiple groups at different levels. So I've used them a lot. And the thing that they have done for me is now I don't have to worry about designing boss monsters to deal with the incredible array of unknown, super powerful character abilities that could completely circumvent a battle. Right? That there's so many different ways, especially I have a 20th level game with 3 different versions of 5e going. There's no way I can know all the things that they can do, right? Blinding and stunning. I had them fight a monster the other day who was at disadvantage on all of his attacks, and they all had advantage on all of their attacks for the entire battle. They had so many ways to get it that it didn't matter, right? The monster was at disadvantage on every attack, and they were at advantage on every attack. Now, his attack bonus was so high, I think it was plus 17, it didn't matter. He was still hitting like crazy, and they were hitting like crazy, but he also had like 700 hit points, so it didn't really matter, right? But those are examples. There's just so many things going on in the game at that point that I can't keep track of the specifics, right? I can't know what's going on there, but I know that if he got pinned down from something, if there's something that's limiting the ability for this monster to behave as he should behave given the story, I can use Dreadful Blessings to bring him back into the story. I can have them do it. An example of something I did was I ran Demogorgon, right? It was actually one of that, this is a long story, but it was one of the heads of Demogorgon had taken control of the other head of Demogorgon, and the characters were battling essentially Demogorgon, right? And at one point, one of the characters was getting beat up a lot, and I think was down. And a mage, a necromancer, one of the characters, threw up a wall of force in like an igloo shape so that there's one direction in where other people could go into the igloo, heal up the person, kind of get ready, and without Demogorgon being able to do it. And he was like slapping his tentacle on top of it. So then, and he was doing legendary attacks and he was banging on it, right? And they're like, oh, that's good. Like, he's using his legendary actions, hitting this wall of force that he can't get through. And then at his turn, I'm like, he uses a Dreadful Blessing and he grabs it with his tentacles and he tears the wall of force open. And they're like, oh, right? Like now they're exposed. And now the healer is exposed too, right? That was an example of using a Dreadful Blessing to say, like, you're not going to be able to just put up a wall of force and avoid Demogorgon's sole range of attacks, right? Could I have designed Demogorgon to deal with stuff like that? Yeah. You know what's easier? Having a thing where I can just do things on the fly. That made it significantly easier. But when should you use them? And when should you not use them is a really important question. The tricky part is knowing how and when to use them. And it's a bit of an advanced RPG technique. You have to have a feeling for this kind of thing to know when and how to use them and when not to use them so that you're not doing these things. For example, you don't want to use them to take away agency from the characters. When the characters need to be able to do things. So if a character has spent an entire action to kind of do a thing, you don't want to just immediately get rid of the thing that they took their action on. However, if they have an asymmetric thing where they spent an action on it, but it removes a whole pile of actions from the monsters, let it eat up some number of actions from the monsters, and then they use a Dreadful Blessing to get the rest of their actions back. So a lot of times when we're looking at the effects that high level and characters have in 5e, they are eating up a disproportionate amount of resources with their resources. For example, let's say I have a monk and the monk punches somebody and does stunning strike and stuns that creature. If they only stun it for one round, you've essentially absorbed one action for another action, right? You took your action to remove the action from them. That's pretty reasonable. But if you're taking 3 actions away from them, or you're doing it on a boss and that boss has a bunch of legendary actions, right? That can be an issue. So it's important to recognize like what the value is there for the character. So you're not just getting rid of the thing that they want to do. But I'm going to talk about a fundamental problem, but we'll get to that in a second. Fundamental problem with how players look at bosses. So you don't want to use them to take away character agency. And that's a wide subject. So you really, you have to be pretty careful with it. You also don't want them, you want to make sure to use them so that the monster meets its intention in the story. That's what you're really using it for. You're not using it to get revenge against a player for their powerful abilities. You're not using it as a gotcha. You're using it specifically to ensure that when the monster that is in your story meets the expectation of that story, right? That's really what you're using it for. Because a lot of times the character abilities that are removing agency from the monsters have the reason why I know I get frustrated from that is because I had a feeling of what this monster was supposed to do in the story, and now it can't do that anymore. Right? That's a real issue. Dealing with use them to deal with the tremendous amount of high-level character BS that cannot be predicted. There are so many things characters can do. Spiking their damage, removing character agency, preventing movement, absorbing damage, all this kind of stuff that they do. Super high armor classes, resistance to everything. You can't keep track of it all. I can't keep track of it all. But I don't need to keep track of it if I have these universal get out of jail free cards, right? I can have a dragon who drops one of these and pierces through fire resistance when he breathes out a blast of fire damage. If I had Dreadful Blessings, I wouldn't have to worry about Hero's Feast. I complained about Hero's Feast for a long time because it totally destroys green dragons. Turns out I could have just used them and broken through resistance if I had for that one monster. You still don't want to remove everything, but it can help. So it's a cheat card with a consequence. There ought to be a difficulty for the monster to kind of use it. They should still have to eat something when they use it. They shouldn't get just completely omit whatever the character ability was. Right? There should be some cost, and you kind of have to figure out what that cost is. A lot of time it's just action removal. They get one less legendary action because they had to use their Dreadful Blessing in order to shatter through the force cage or something like that. It's a really good way to keep your hand on the threat dial, right? But a lot of time when I'm running high level 5e games, I want to know that the threat is still there so that the players still feel on the edge of their seat, right? You don't want a boring boss fight, right? You just don't want a boss fight that's boring. You want an exciting boss fight. This lets you keep up the pace. This lets you say, I have my single boss and I can use this thing and it works really well. So what are some examples that you can use them for? Saving on a saving throw. That's an obvious one. Ending an ongoing effect, maybe by letting the effect go on for a round or two. For example, you could blind a creature, right? And it's blinded until its turn. And then at the beginning of its turn, it drops one of these and now it's no longer blinded. So it's not reducing on its attacks, but you had all these free attacks in the meantime. Giving yourself advantage on all attacks. I like this one because a lot of time characters have a lot of ways to keep their defenses up. I have had monsters. I had a Marilith, right? So I had a Marilith queen who made 7 attacks on a round and she missed so often that I just said she now has advantage on all attacks. But I even did worse. I gave 3 up at once and let her attack 3 targets with all of her attacks. She had 3 different people around her. She did 7 attacks on one, 7 attacks on one, and 7 attacks on one. She did a bunch, 21 different attacks. All right. But she burned 3 dreadful blessings to do it because she had like 8 hit points left. And I'm like, she's using these 8 hit points. Impose disadvantage on an opponent's saving throw, but only within reason, right? You don't want to do this to steal agency away from them, but you can, for example, say like, the dragon breathes and you all have disadvantage on your saving throw against this breath, right? Particularly if you feel like they've been having too easy a time dealing with the breath weapon. Maybe you impose disadvantage on there, and then maybe you have the way that they have advantage, so then it evens it out, right? That's a way to kind of bring that threat back. Change a damage type. I had a big dragon that they were facing, and he ripped off a chunk of rock from an arcane tower, and it let him change his breath weapon into things like lightning and acid and stuff like that. I actually didn't use dreadful blessings for that, but that would be an example where you could shift damage types by dropping in dreadful blessings. Absorbing hit points from a minion. I kind of like this one, that if you have a bunch of minions around the area, he can, especially if it's like any kind of necromancer or demon kind of entity, it can just tear the souls out of those living and give itself more hit points. This helps you with guys that are spiking tremendous amounts of damage. You can give them a little bit more hit points, but the characters know, oh, good, he's eating his friends. That's good. That way we don't have to deal with the friends. That works good. Healing, direct healing, you can do it, but I would do it sparingly because it's a really big downward beat when they are healing wounds. So I would be a little bit wary of that. Taking extra actions. I mentioned this before, right? Taking extra actions is a good thing. If you feel like the actions have been ineffective, you can use these to take even more actions. Moving without provoking. Bosses really ought to have this anyway. So maybe you don't even use a dreadful blessing for this, but boss monsters need some way to be able to move around and not get pinned down. A lot of time they should just have it. But if you want, you could use a dreadful blessing to give it that ability. Recharging abilities. If you got a dragon with a breath weapon, giving it a new spell, right? You have a high level spellcaster, they could use a dreadful blessing to gain a spell slot back and then use another big spell, things like that. Bringing threat to unthreatened characters. A lot of times, particularly if you have 5 or 6 characters, there are characters who aren't taking any kind of damage at all. You can use these to like spread damage out, to do things to people that otherwise can't be hit. This is a good way to use these dreadful blessings in order to bring that threat to people who are otherwise unthreatened. What should you not use them for? Revenge. It's really easy to get mad when the players are bringing all this stuff to the table and they're ruining your boss monster and you want to get them back. That's not why you should use them. You should use them because you want to bring the story. You want to bring the monster story to be consequential, right? You want to bring the monster story up to where it ought to be. Don't use it to take away character agency, right? Be really careful about just using dreadful blessings to eat things. That can be a problem. Eliminating the character's really cool thing. If they have something they did that or want to do that's really cool, don't just omit it. Don't just get rid of it because of a dreadful blessing. And removing a character's actions, which is similar to the removing character agencies. Like that's those are all important things that you ought to consider when you're using it. So, some examples where I use dreadful blessings and use them in great effect. And one thing I want to clarify, my players really like them. I'm shocked, right? Because they hate legendary resistance. My players have hated legendary resistance for years. Hated it. And lots of people hate it. Matt Colville has talked about how he hates legendary resistance. Flea Mortals are completely gone and replaced with other things, right? Lots of players hate legendary resistance. And I don't know exactly why, but they don't mind dreadful blessings. right? They will joke about it. They're like, oh, it's the DM cheat card, right? They don't get, but all of my players says, no, they actually are pretty cool. It's also the first time that I have seen players go out of their way to try to cast things in order to get them to use their dreadful blessings so that you can get rid of them, because they know that those are threats to us. That's not just them getting rid of things. It's also damage that they're going to do our way, and we want to get rid of that. So they're really happy to watch them get burned down. Right? All of my players almost universally have said, yes, I prefer them to legendary resistance, even though they're kind of the same thing. And even though you have more of them, because they're fun to get rid of. And I know that, like, you know, those are threats coming back in the other direction. So that was a really interesting insight. And again, I've been using them for a while now. I've used them for maybe a year, and people really like them. So some examples. My Marilith Queen. I had a Marilith Queen. This comes out of Fantastic Lairs, a fantastic book that myself and Scott Fitzgerald Gray and James Intercastle wrote. You can find it over on the Sly Flourish bookstore. It is a book of 23 boss lairs from first level to 20th level, and one of them, which is 16th or 17th level, I upped it a little bit, was against a super powerful Marilith Queen called the Blade Queen, and I had her protecting one of the soul vessels of Ozymandias, the main boss in my City of Arches game. Spoiler. And she was super powerful, right? She could summon blades and send them all over the map. She had an aura of blades that are around her, and she's hitting people with swords, and she could teleport from round to round, so she could go and attack people all over the map. But she was missing a lot, and she was really close to the edge of dead. And I said, bang, I'm going to use all three of her remaining dreadful blessings to make full attacks against every single character that was there. It was like 300 damage that she dished out. She dished out a ton, but she spread it around all three. I think one person dropped, and the other two were like, we have like 4 hit points left. And then they killed her. And like, wow, that was hard. Like, I can't believe she whipped out that much damage that quickly. That worked really well. I had a fiendish ancient dragon, I mentioned this, who ripped apart a magic tower and used the pieces of the magic tower to change the damage type that he was doing by using dreadful blessings on that. He could also use dreadful blessings to like break out of a banish. At one point they banished him, and then he used it to break out but fly by and breathe on them as soon as he got it banished back. That worked really well. Demogorgon tearing apart the Wall of Force igloo, right? I mentioned that one. Shattering things like Wall of Force, penetrating things that typically don't require a save is a great use for dreadful blessings, right? Removing or getting rid of the effects, that works really well. Now, here's the interesting one. This happened last Wednesday. My characters have been dealing with the Nameless King since level 1 for more than a year and a half. They've been talking about it, and they knew he was out there. They've been failing his cult. Eventually, he got released. He came back. He was renamed as Ozymandias. He got his name back as Ozymandias, and they fought him once and beat him, and it was really hard. And they're like, wow, he was really hard. But because his soul vessel's around, he's still around. And then he attacked again. This time, he had a Staff of the Magi. He had robes of the Archmagi, and he had a Ring of 3 Wishes that he was using to summon meteor swarms and drop them on the city. The characters defeated his mount, a super powerful fiendish red dragon known as Zereth. That was an 800 hit point fiendish red dragon. They defeated that, and then they went to face Ozymandias. He started off by dropping a meteor swarm on them. Then a couple of the characters went up, and our barbarian went up, who has a Vorpal sword, and hit and rolled a 20, right? And everyone went, isn't that a Vorpal sword? And I'm like, it is. And they're like, oh my God, you just beheaded Ozymandias. He had all 5 of his of his dreadful blessings free to him. I could have used them, but I was like, that is so epic. That idea of going over and beheading the boss in the 3rd turn of this big battle. It was also the end of the night. I had expected that we were going to have the next session of them battling Ozymandias, but I'm like, we'll start it now. But I was like, this is so perfect. I think I'm going to not use the dreadful blessings. And my story reason for this was that Ozymandias had actually given the last tiny shred of his little black shriveled soul to Abraxas, the demon prince of Chul. And Abraxas had that soul in his magical scepter. And I already knew that there was going to be this kind of follow-on arc, because I wanted the characters to have some time at 20th level, to enjoy 20th level. I knew there was going to be a follow-on arc of going into Chul, facing Abraxas, and then destroying the last remaining soul vessel of Ozymandias for the final time. But I was like, what's cooler is you cut off his head. The soul, they see that the soul went off to Chul, because there was a big portal to Chul. They saw that the soul went off there. And they know Ozymandias is still kind of around, right? We defeated him here. They got, he had all this preparation, but it got totally destroyed by a Vorpal sword. They already had all of his stuff. But I was like, well, now when they go to Chul, I can still have Ozymandias there, only now he is this bound servant of Abraxas. Now, little story element, Abraxas is actually killed by another super powerful creature named Vrys. Vrys killed Abraxas. Now Vrys has control of Ozymandias. So now when they face Vrys, they have to face Vrys and Ozymandias. Now, he won't have all of his special stuff. He's not going to have his Ring of Three Wishes. He's not going to have his Staff of the Magi. He's not going to have the Robes of the Archmagi. But now they have to face two bosses at the same time that are, one's a CR 30 and one's a CR 26 at 20th level, right? And I want to make it that they feel bad for Ozymandias. My goal is to show that he is like bound by radiant chains, and and then Vrys is like controlling him, and they're like, oh man, poor Ozymandias. Like, I want somebody to say that. I don't think they're really they hate him so much. I don't think that's going to work. But now they get to face him again anyway. So I was like, I'm not going to take away, I could use these dreadful blessings, but I'm not going to take them away from the character who just got his rolled a 20 on a critical hit against a main boss. That he's going to remember that the rest of his life. And if I had taken it away by using a bunch of dreadful blessings, I don't think it would have been nearly as cool or impactful, and I don't think he would have remembered it. So that was an example of me restraining myself from using dreadful blessings. And everybody at the table was sure I was going to do it. They all said afterwards, I am amazed you didn't use the dreadful blessings. And I know what I said to them was, if his soul hadn't been bound to Chul, he would have used them, but he didn't have the chance, right? Because he died, because his head was cut off that quickly, the soul absorption thing happened faster than he could do it. So I even had a story reason for him to do it. So that was an example where I didn't use it. So I hope this gives you a good idea of like what dreadful blessings are, how you can use them, this sort of advanced technique on how to use them in your 5e games to give yourself some ability to control, not control, but to influence the feeling of the game to make sure that boss monsters are staying, are maintaining the story impact that they should have without having to put a lot of extra work on yourself to redesign all of the mechanics of 5e.